the world is on fire. There has to be a motivation to change.
As the saying goes, technicians make things happen.
And I wish I could continue because it's important to keep going.
The credit, the visibility and the recognition for the work that they're already doing.
Across this series, we've been speaking to technicians from universities across Scotland, exploring their role in environmental sustainability. We've heard how sustainability is often hidden in everything they do, built into day-to-day lab work, teaching and decision-making.
We've heard about a disconnect between our values at home and our practice at work, about work that's happening everywhere but doesn't always feel visible. We've heard that technicians are in the room, parts of conversations, but are not always shaping the decisions behind them. And we've heard about this work, despite it being essential, is often happening informally on top of already busy roles, driven by commitment and personal motivation.
So across this series, a clear picture has emerged. The work is happening, but the systems around it haven't always caught up.
In this final episode, we're stepping back and bringing those conversations together. We're joined by Susie Cook, Sustainability Implementation Manager at the University of Edinburgh, and Charli Baker, Research Fellow at the Institute for Technical Skills and Strategy, who led the research behind the report, Driving Environmental Sustainability, the Contribution of Technical Professionals in Higher Education and Research.
Together, they bring perspectives from both implementation and research, helping us explore what this all means at a broader level and what needs to happen next. Before we jump into the episode, it's my pleasure to introduce our guests. Charli Baker is a research fellow and member of the Research and Policy Group at the UK ITSS. Charli led the ITSS report on technical professionals in environmental sustainability and has previously engaged with sustainability as a research assistant in psychology. Susie is the Sustainability Implementation Manager at the University of Edinburgh. Her role includes developing and delivering resources to support and advise university researchers and professional services staff to embed sustainability into the research and innovation project life cycles. She also supports and coordinates the implementation of work towards the UK-wide Concordat for Sustainability in Research and Innovation Practice across relevant operations and business practices. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really pleased that you were able to come and share your views on our sustainability series so far.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation.
We've been talking to technicians about their contributions to environmental sustainability, which often are happening informally and alongside their core roles. So I'm interested, Susie, for what you've heard across the series, what stands out most about the contribution technicians are making to sustainability?
So it was really interesting, I guess, to listen and see how much was reflected in kind of my personal experience over the last, 18 months working quite closely with technicians. I think there's definitely, and I think what was reflected in the previous episodes, there's a disconnect somewhere with, I think, people in sustainability or people in universities who are working quite closely with technicians, who are very aware of that expertise, the commitment, so much drive and willingness to volunteer outside of, I guess, day-to-day job roles. And I guess what's quite stark from that experience and then talking to, I guess, research funders and other people like slightly more of a step back, there's definitely a disconnect there, which I think is quite interesting in terms of just awareness of who is doing what, where, and under what capacity. And I think we've spoken at length, and this was also, I guess, reflected in the previous episodes around the existing discrepancies we have at the moment around the amount of work put in and the recognition for that, even just being aware of it. Not only that, but also recognition in terms of job progression, naming on grants and things like that. So I guess kind of that general sense would be my main takeaway from what's stood out for me.
Thank you. Anything to add, Charli? Is any what stood out the most for you from the series so far?
Yeah, I think the thing that struck me the most was it does sort of link to Susie's point about maybe disconnects and how things look perhaps a little less joined up than we'd like. And it was just about how the contributions of the technical professionals who took part in the podcast and obviously have been included in the report, they were making really diverse and quite varied contributions to sustainability, whether it was across teaching, research, central support, or more kind of sort of managerial duties. And they often weren't going through formal channels. Something I'm sure we'll talk about are mechanisms for formal recognition and formal workloading, things like that. But a point that the Institute and the Technician Commitment often make is that the sort of multifaceted nature of the technical role often goes a little underappreciated and under-recognized. And I think the people who took part in the podcast episode so far really illustrated that by speaking to the diversity of contributing to environmental sustainability and how that can be a challenge, especially when it's done off your own back.
So maybe I can follow up with Charli, I guess, first then with this idea that, often much of the work sits outside the formal roles of technicians, and it relies on kind of individuals' own motivation to do this work. And I guess, what are the risks of that?
Quite simply, the risk is that all these informal contributions actually eventually stop. Not because people stop wanting to do them, but when we get down to brass tacks and we look at the nuts and bolts, the sort of daily drivers of a role profile, a job spec, if you've not got something formally on there, all those informal contributions are going to butt up against that, and they risk becoming untenable. Now, that's very much the risk for universities, for higher education and the research sector. But if we think specifically about technical professionals, then the risk is that what's been done informally and out of effectively passion and goodwill becomes expected, and dare we say it, becomes taken for granted. If it's difficult to move the needle now, it'll truly be a struggle at that point.
Yeah, I think it was reflected in what Mira was saying when we were talking about the challenges that she's faced, and that time is a massive issue, and there are things she wants to do and continue with that she can't do anymore because it's not a formally recognized part of her job description. So is there anything you'd like to add to that, Susie, to the risks of this work sitting outside our formal roles?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think what kind of struck me about that is that lack of continuity piece. I think we struggle with that at universities as a whole. We're very good at holding institutional knowledge, personal expertise within our own heads that's not formalized and put somewhere. And I think the risk of not formalizing these roles and kind of creating a community of expertise, which we do already have, with kind of, I guess, not minimal support, but a level of support would be quite easy to develop that and develop quite a leading and rich body of knowledge, both in sustainability but in that applied sense. And I think you also not only risk that continuity, so I've seen projects from universities to universities that just happen on the cyclical nature because it sits with someone, that person leaves, a new person comes in, you redo a project, someone goes, oh, I remember that, we did that 15 years ago, and you go, oh, it's Groundhog Day, what's going on? And I think there's that risk. But also the lack of awareness of what an appropriate intervention might be. So I'm a sustainability generalist, I do behavior change, I do communications, I do engagement. What I don't do is work in a technical setting. I can give the advice I can give up to a certain level, and without that formalized role of someone that has both the time, the resources, but also the confidence, and I think without that formalized role, people in general, in my experience from working with those that have volunteered in this space, aren't aware of how valuable they are, or if they are aware, aren't great at being able to, I guess, to put their neck out in a sense, because they haven't been supported to have that confidence. And without that, you end up suggesting things that just purely aren't appropriate. I mean, I talk to people from workshops to, I don't know, wet labs to someone that just sits behind a computer all day. They're very different use cases in terms of sustainable research practice, which is my job. So yeah, I think that without a formalized role, that time, that resource, that confidence, you really do risk losing a quick body of knowledge and that awareness of what might work somewhere but might not work somewhere as well.
Yeah, and we heard from Alyssa, who has been given that formalized role. She talks a lot about how even though she's got this formalized role, she's still relying on volunteers and people who don't have that in their job description. So even with that sort of formalization, there's still that risk that, like Charli was saying, all those people who are helping out the goodness of their heart because they're passionate about it just suddenly don't have the time. And then those people with formalized roles have all this extra work to do that was previously done by people who were just volunteering. So we really need it in job descriptions, not just formalized roles. Why then do you think, Charli, you touched on this recognition, Charli touched on this recognition slightly earlier, that there's this gap between sustainability work that's happening and how it's recognized at the institutional level?
I think that, once again, it's this notion of the informal perhaps starting to creep or having crept into the expected or the taken for granted. And I think it's important to sort of zoom out and say that, unfortunately, a lot of the work within the technical community is expected or taken for granted, whether formalized or otherwise. However, if you take that and you put it with the historically, let's say, varied levels of visibility and recognition that technicians have in institutions, you really start to come up with, or come up against rather, a situation where it's always bubbling under and simmering, but it's never boiling over into the wider reaches of the institution. Especially when you have informal mechanisms for contributing to environmental sustainability. You perhaps have informal support from a line manager or a supportive research group lead, and you don't have a formal route into the policy of your institution or the kind of, even the decision making of a research group. You are perhaps just there to do your job. If you're doing things outside of it, wonderful, that's benefiting everybody else. But we don't currently, typically, I should say, not this isn't true for everywhere, but we typically don't have these mechanisms or these forums for those people who have the confidence or have been inspired to put their head above the parapet and shout about what they're doing. And I think until that changes, unfortunately, much like the more historical recognition issues, that's going to keep trundling along at its own pace.
Yeah, Susie?
Yeah, I think it requires long-term investment in both people and expertise, which is just something that we're not seeing in the sector at the moment. Obviously, it's a much larger issue than just the last couple of years. But I think while I maybe specifically to environmental sustainability, because some of the developments in policies and agreements over the last couple of years, it's become a bit more visible in terms of that sense. There's not that institutional sectoral support available, which would really move the needle on kind of progress on the sustainability aspect of it all, but also on the recognition and support. I also think that it's because we still have varying pockets of research culture and what that looks like and how they differ from place to place. I mean, I'm in an interesting position in that I am a professional services staff member. I sit in a corporate services group, so I go out and talk to a lot of different research groups, institutes, schools and departments, and the variability of the culture and environment of those workplaces is quite stark. And I can definitely see how in some places the gap is smaller. It's still there, it absolutely definitely exists, but in some places the gulf is so large because there's still, or there continues to be, either an unspoken rule that people shouldn't be putting their head above the parapet for informal work that they're doing, or that additional effort shouldn't be shouted about because you should only really be speaking about what's in your formalized role description. So that's, I think, been a really big learning for me, because I think the way that, sustainability, typically, we're a nice workplace. Everyone's kind of quite on board and collegiate, I guess, and I think it's been quite eye-opening for me to go into spaces where that collegiality, maybe a bit too strong to say doesn't exist, but is more difficult to find, let's say.
Yeah, I think there's differing pressures out there. I guess that's what it comes down to. If the pressure is on getting those research results out, then sustainability possibly drops down. And I think what really raised sustainability up there in people's minds was when people like the UKRI said, well, we're not going to fund you unless you are coming up to a certain level with your sustainability. And then we saw lots of time and effort in higher education places to put sustainability in the forefront, and technicians picked up a lot of that work. And then the box is ticked, and then there's like a general thank you to a whole group of people without naming people, and then it's just expected then to now be there forever. It's not like a researcher who gets a grant and says, well, this professor's got this grant, well done. It's much more, I don't know, a shared credit, and so it makes it very difficult for anybody to then say, well, I did this rather than we did this.
Absolutely, and there needs to be that recognition in that process, in my opinion. I don't think it's really good enough. Yeah, good enough from the funder perspective, because this is not information that they don't know. Their environmental sustainability professionals speak to us, they speak to the sector. This is feedback that they're getting constantly saying, you're putting responsibility on a group of people named in this grant. They are not the people. From a generalized perspective, there are definitely some PIs and academics who do an absolutely fantastic job, let me just say that very clearly. But in general, the group and the body of people who are saving the eligibility of that research group in terms of the sustainability policy, they're not being named and they're not being recognised. And I think that has to come from both places. It has to come from that external funding source and the institution itself as well.
I think also from technicians having sharp elbows and just kind of getting stuck in there as well sometimes as well. We can't expect everything to happen to us. We sometimes have to put ourselves forward.
Yeah. It came up a couple of times in the series. A couple of technicians have said, we need to be better about putting ourselves out there and shouting about what we do. So, yeah.
And there were some great case studies, weren't there, Charlie? There, but people who have done that within their work. It wasn't expected, but they've kind of gone, well, I am going to do this. I'm going to go join this committee. I'm going to go do this piece of work. And that gave them a real strength and a real voice, I think. But coming round to the idea then that getting technicians at the table and having those kind of leadership roles, this is something that me and you, Susie, have worked on. But how do we make sure that technicians are there? How are you ensuring that within your SRS role?
I mean, at the moment, I'm, I guess, trying to use the mechanisms of, if there's training, if there's committees, is there meetings that I can be inviting specific technical staff to attend. That's absolutely things that we can do and we should be doing. I will say I have to give a big shout out to our two local sustainability coordinators that work in our College of Science and Engineering and our College of Medicine and Veterinary Medicine. They have both had technical roles in the past and academic roles in the past and have come into this slightly hybrid professional services technical role, sustainability role. And in terms of having them as both, I guess, the decision makers and the arbiters of the decisions of how we implement things, they've also been quite important with that, because they can do a job in research groups, in buildings, on the ground in a way that I can't do. So in terms of them being able to give the visibility of the technical community as a whole in regards to our lab sustainability awards, that's information and that's awareness from us that I would not have been able to have without them in their roles. I think also just keeping asking awkward questions in terms of the conversation around protected time, the conversations around formalized role descriptions, the conversations around recognition and expertise, either within sub-projects like we're a part of Lee, or just asking those questions slightly cheekily as and when. That's kind of the mechanisms that we have at the moment. I'd hope that as the financial position in the sector improves, which we hope that it does, that there will be slightly more that we can do in terms of that recognition piece, but also having more conversations around getting sustainability within promotional criteria. That's well outside the remit of my role, but it's definitely information that I'm passing on to the correct people at the university, either via our research cultures delivery group or HR processes as and when that feels appropriate.
And Charlie, I guess, from your ITSS sustainability report, that was one of the main findings, wasn't it, that technicians should really be recognised and should be represented in sustainability planning. But how do you then put that into action?
Absolutely, and I think we did see some sort of headline examples of either nominations or outright recipients of awards for sustainability and things like that. So there was clearly interest in kind of a good news story, and institutes were quite keen to rally behind those. But I think there were two things that really came out of the report, and I think also were true in the earlier podcast episodes as well. The first one was ensuring that this isn't all just incumbent on technical professionals doing it themselves. It wasn't just about having sharp elbows and a long neck to get up and above the crowd. If you've got stakeholders in your institution that have the kind of decisional authority to loop people into strategic planning, sustainable development goals, things like that, it's incumbent on them to make sure they're getting out and about across their institutions, as we know that technical professionals do get siloed, whether it's a satellite campus or a specific research facility, or just a hard-to-get-to central support office. You need your people in the institution who can make decisions, pounding the pavements and making sure they're engaging with and staying up to date with the expertise, so that when they go back and they start to plan these big strategic decisions, they know who to go to mobilize expertise, to mobilize experience, and that real kind of specialist tacit knowledge that often technical professionals excel at. The other thing would be a little more formal, which is obviously something I think we'll stick on, and it's either introducing or expanding kind of routes and inflow pathways for technical professionals to actually feed into strategy. It may be localized to environmental sustainability. It may be localized to one area of sustainability. But if I think about the report, and I think about Loughborough, the Technical Sustainability Champions Network, that took a few years to really get to this point, but people on that committee now are being consulted as to the sustainable goals of the university, as to the strategy. And that's something that every university has the power to do that. Every research institute has the wherewithal to do that, should they be inclined. And I think if we can get both those strands moving in the same direction, we'd be in a much stronger position that's much more validating for the technical professionals who helped build a lot of this work.
That's really interesting. I'm really interested in the idea of the senior leaders pounding the pavement. So that kind of increased visibility, I think, would be fantastic.
Yeah, I really like your suggestion of these technical sustainability champions, the committees that are being asked for input. And I think this also comes back to much of the work sitting outside formal roles and time and capacity coming up all the time. And we really saw that in the podcast. Like, everyone talked about time being the main issues, the capacity. They've got this outside their jobs, their job descriptions, their regular jobs. What would you say, do you think, the most effective ways to move from this informal effort to something more structured and supported, whether it's these committees that are being set up or the champions that you're talking about there, Charli, or just having more structure in your role, like putting that in your job description?
I think both of those would be great examples and would be excellent work if they were done. I think, for my money, the most effective way to move from informal to structured and supported is this formalized workloading that people have spoken about. They've spoken to me about it, they've spoken to you about it, and I'm sure they've spoken to their colleagues about it. But I think that getting to that workloading process needs to be underpinned by consultation and review. And I appreciate these are concepts that can take a bit of gestating. They're not going to change things overnight, but look inwards at an institution and evaluate, take stock of the kind of sustainability roles that exist there. What's missing? What roles might need creating, or what duties can be split across and appropriately delegated across experts who are already contributing to that kind of work, in this instance, technical colleagues. Review whether those colleagues want to continue doing that work in a formal capacity, or whether they've maybe reached that point of irreconciliation and they want to draw a line under it and delegate it to a suitable colleague. Once you've once you've got that, you can then start to look at the sort of tricky issues of full-time equivalents and reviewing actual forms and specifications and things like that. But along the way, what you do is you create a sort of network or an apparatus within the university that becomes fully aware of both the breadth of sustainability expertise that it has, but also the extent of the change required to really make it a living, breathing part of the institution. So I think that would really be the sort of bottom line change that I think would bring about a lot of good just across the sector.
I think I agree with most, if not all, of what Charlie just said. But I think maybe just to add very quickly, as much as I don't want to make a suggestion that puts more work on technical staff, but make a note of what you do. Because if you've got a Word document, even if it's just bullet points that lists how much time you spend in meetings, how much time you spend corralling people to do things, even if it's purely just for you, if someone turns around and makes any kind of illusion that it's an easy thing to do or it's quick, you have that document to say, these are all the tasks I have completed, this is the time that I've spent on this. The success that you're seeing right now is not something that's come very quick and very easy, and the success that you do see, I'm speaking in terms of our Lab Award accreditation here at Edinburgh, I think that success is almost paradoxically a victim of its own success, in that we've been able to do it because of an enormous amount of work from people. But as I think, Lee, you've alluded to a few times, there's now that expectation that that will continue. And I think unless you've got a very clear black and white list, basically, of I did this, this, and this, it took this much time, this is what I didn't do because I was doing this, then you've got a much more persuasive case to say, if you want this to continue, which you do because your research funding is at risk, you need to put protected time for me. Because unless you have that, I mean, I see it in my role. I am a full-time sustainability professional, but because I've got, I don't know, something like 40% of my time to develop guidance and resources, I can go back if I've got pressures from other different things and say, look, my job is to do this. I need to do this. Without that formalization, I think that in terms of moving from that informal to formalized working pattern, that's going to be quite difficult to do just within the systems that we work within at universities.
Just really quickly, I think that's an absolutely fantastic point that Susie makes there. And I think it was Michael in one of the earlier episodes who said, they have actually got some time for sustainability. It's 5%. It's a lot harder to move the needle at 5% than it is at 25, for instance, and especially if that's not indicative of the actual lived experience of doing the work week in, week out.
Yeah, I think Michael said Mike had 5%, but I think it was for sustainability and outreach, which automatically, those are not the same thing. So even it's good to have some, and it was really positive to hear that he did have that, but yeah, it still doesn't seem very much, does it, when you actually think about how much work is actually needed for these things?
Yeah, it's an hour and 3/4 a week, so.
Gosh.
But he was one of the few people who did have dedicated time, though. So I guess once maybe it's in there, you can argue for an extension. It's an increased percentage, maybe. Great. So I guess we're nearing the end now, and I guess we really want that kind of call to action, and what are your big takeaways? What is it that you would like to see change? What do you think are going to be the big main things? If you could ask for one thing, give out that kind of key message. What would it be?
Can I be cheeky and give two?
Yes, of course.
I think my first thing would be make sure that your programs of work in your institution have some level of alignment. I mean, we're lucky enough, I guess, at Edinburgh at the moment that I can see what's going on in terms of the technicians' commitment, I can see what's going on in terms of sustainability, and I can see what's going on in terms of research culture. So we've got elements of all of those three things in all of those three different plans. And as much as maybe we're all still doing a lot of that work and it's taking a long time to get progress in those spaces, at least there is an awareness of the different important goals and strategies within those three action plans. It sounds simple, but there's some people that I speak to from other institutions that don't know, A, whether their institution is signed up to the technician's commitment or not, or don't know what they're doing in terms of research cultures, even if they might be doing quite a lot. So I think in terms of that alignment, I think that's quite important for awareness, and also to know where those opportunities for inroads in supporting expertise are. And then I think also just echoing my previous answer in terms of my ask for the sector and for institutions is don't see success in sustainability, particularly in terms of research practice, as an indication that the workload and the morale of your staff is sustainable. I think I would want people to be aware that that is a measure of the skills and the expertise of your technical staff, but also a flashing red reminder to say that you need to nurture and support that. Otherwise, that goodwill, that collegiality, and that community of expertise will not be there forever. And nor should it be, because we can't expect people to do things outside and above of their role description forever. Because that's not a workplace that I want to work in.
I think I'll sort of follow Susie's lead and frame this as two things, but if you're generous, it's one. I think in terms of specificity, I think the one thing that was apparent to me from all the conversations I've had and all that I've heard from people is that formalizing these things, having formal processes, mechanisms, and formal remits are going to be the things that actually make the material changes to the people who are already doing the work or who might want to be, but are being put off by the fact that it is a somewhat exceptionally selfless task. However, the other thing, the part of that, the underpinning part of that would be, if I was going to give a message to institutions across the sector, it would be to look inwards. Really do take stock of what is already happening within your institution. And yes, when it comes to the technical workforce, see what you can do to actually bring it to the front and center. So we hit those sort of key criteria of visibility and recognition. They go hand in hand with the formalization, making sure that people are remunerated, recognized, and championed for this. But also, take that newfound visibility and recognition and use it as a way to better thread sustainability across your institutions. Link your academic and your technical colleagues. Link with estates, with APM, with people like Susie who have outright sustainability and social responsibility roles, and really take this as an opportunity to refresh and reinvigorate your university for the good of the institute itself, for the good of the workforce, and for the good of society at whole. It's a fantastic opportunity if we can really mobilize and build on the momentum that people in the communities are trying to snowball. That would be my message.
It's amazing. It's a great message. Thank you. And thank you so much, both of you, for joining us to discuss kind of the outcomes of our podcast. And thank you. Is there anything else you wanted to say before we kind of round up and close up?
Other than just a massive thank you to all of the technical staff I've worked with in the last 2 years, because in terms of the success that we've been able to achieve at our institution, that would not have been possible without you.
Yeah, I'll echo that and say thank you so much to everybody who gave their time to me, whether it's for interviews, whether it's to chats along the way, or who came up to me at things like TechNet earlier in Edinburgh and just expressed some interest or wanted to share their experiences. I feel very fortunate to do that and to have platforms like this to talk about it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Across this series, we've heard one thing consistently. Technicians are already playing a crucial role in driving sustainability in higher education. They're shaping practice, influencing students, connecting systems and people, and leading change. But for that work to go further, it needs support, with time and resources, recognition, and with the structures that match the scale of the challenge.
Because sustainability in universities is not just about strategy, it's about the people making it happen.
Thanks for listening to Technically Scotland.
Don't forget to join us for our next episode, which will be dropping very soon. A huge, huge thank you to our guests for this episode, Susie and Charli, and also our guests for the rest of the series, those amazing 7 technicians who shared their insights and their experiences with us to make this series possible. We couldn't have done that without you. We'd also like to thank the Technician Commitment Collaboration Fund for their support as we develop this podcast and spread our podcast out through Scotland. Please share this podcast with your colleagues. Please follow us wherever you get your podcasts. You can always follow us on LinkedIn so you never miss an episode. And if you have been inspired by this series to get involved in some sustainability initiative in your institution, please give us a shout on LinkedIn. Let us know. We are very keen to find out what everyone is up to. We are now looking for guests for a future episode. So if you would like to share your technician career journey or a project you're working on that you find very interesting or anything, if you'd just like to come and have a chat with us, please get in touch via LinkedIn. Thanks for listening.